another episode of This Old Empire. When we left off, we had cut our holes into our foot shells and made modifications to our Vex foot brackets, as well as drilled some holes into the HOLME foot plates. So what we're going to do is we did a lot of work while we were off camera for a while. So some of that was, if you remember, on the foot shells, I originally had the COM-8 ankle lock system, which had a whole bracket that mounted in here. So as you can see, we filled in the hole with some JB Weld steel, have repainted it, clear coated it, it's all back up. We have the new slot for the HOLME ankle plate, the shaft that comes out of it. And then we've got our battery box sitting right here. And then here's our foot shell. So there's the foot plate. As you can see, we went ahead and painted a section of this white because that will be sticking out of the ankle, and not required to. Personal preference was to have it white. That way it was just not something black sticking out of there. As you can see, we've redone our wiring and have some nice braided hose on there, and we have our Anderson power pole quick connector there on the side. Now, one note with that, I don't know if you can see that. That pivots, all right? So that is designed so it can flex in. We had to round the edges off so it could push in. Now, I'll go over here in a minute some of the challenges of doing this, using this ankle plate or foot plate. We've got our motors all on the bottom. We've got our Vex wheels, and we'll push our motor wire through. Now, so there's a couple things. So that ankle plate, here's the other ankle, for example, or other plate for reference. Yeah, it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. And you think about it, 1/8 of an inch is really not that much. However, it starts to play with some of your references. First thing we noticed is that the Vex foot shells that you get from Kevin or others were about 5 millimeters longer height, and started noticing that extra 1/8 of an inch took away the wiggle fudge factor that you had in the bottom of your foot shells. And so they were what used to be able to slide nicely underneath. You know, you used to be able to do kind of angle it in and nest it down. You don't have that option anymore because now you have this large vertical rod that's now in the way, and so you don't have that fudge factor to shift it back and forth. So that was the first thing. So that we started running into that. So the first way we got around that is, as I kind of said it, we took off 5 millimeters all the way around on both Vex foot shells, foot brackets. The reason we did that was to give clearance once it's inside the foot shell, that it's not pushing or riding up on it. Another aspect is on the rear side, which just goes back towards, on my case, back towards the Q85, was running into the bottom of the foot shell. So we had to really file this down, file all of our edges so they're nice and smooth, and nothing's, there's no catching. I can run my fingers in here without issue. Next thing we did is, I think we showed that we enlarged the center hole that goes up, that feeds out of the foot shell to the ankle. Then we've got our side hole that basically goes from the acrylic and Anderson power pole connectors. The wire goes down through here, loops out of this hole, back up and goes through here. You also have the Vex control cable, or sorry, the Q85 control cable running through there. All right, so that all goes together. And so we have 2 other holes. So this one, the screw, panhead screw, is just to help hold the bracket to the foot plate. And this other one has the same effect, but also has a cable connector, just kind of clamp, help hold things in place. Really kind of worry about, those wires getting loose and getting down inside, the Q85 wheel as it's moving, or the Vex, or a stick or something else like getting in there and then potentially playing havoc. So a little extra overtime working on that paid off. But definitely my recommendation, I've already passed this on to Kevin, take down at least 5 millimeters off the base of these foot shells, or Vex plates. Alright, the next thing Let me get the tool that I used. Okay, so ran into a unique problem, and I'm going to show you a close-up view. All right, so this is one of the bolts that Kevin provides. You can see that. Nice looking, nice and shiny. No issues. All right, here's the other one. And you should very quickly be able to see that glaring line right there. All right, that gouge was entirely my fault. Not anything Kevin did. Literally what happened, as best as I can figure it out, is that as I went through this plate, as well as the edges of the foot shell on the foot channel, had a very slight burr that I hadn't noticed that was probably sitting somewhere inside. And it was a little snug and tight, you know, as I was using you know, my 1 1/4 inch socket extender or hex extender, so I could kind of just push it in. It was just easy. I kind of just turned it. What I didn't realize is it kind of hung up, and didn't think through it, forced it a little bit, and ended up getting that as a result. So I've sanded it down, you know, really worked on it. It's still there. However, fairly certain it's not too big of an issue. So what I ended up doing, you remember, I love my Dremel, useful for all those hard to reach places, especially with this extension cable. So I used one of these grinding stones. It's an angled head, and you can see some of the paint and steel and other items are still on there. But it's just got a nice oval shape. Now in doing that, I was able to use the large flat portion, because it's small enough it fits inside the hole with ease, that I could run that around and completely smooth out, perfectly smooth, inside there. The other thing that I did is with this beveled cone tip, is I just kind of worked that edge and I beveled all of the edges where that bolt has to go through. So this side, this side, this side, and this side. Beveled all 4 of those. And what that did is it just kind of made sure there was no sharp edges that it could have been hanging on that I wasn't seeing or potentially wasn't feeling, or maybe I ran my finger didn't run it all the way around and it was just a fault of my own. I also then did the same thing on the inside of both sides of the foot channel, as well as the inner channel itself, where that's in there. In doing that, what I realized is that I was probably 1/2 millimeter off in one of my directions. Really not noticeable, but it was enough that it was binding it up. And now I can actually put it all on there and slide both of those bolts with very little effort through when the entire assembly together. Oh, and I also did this on the ankle as well. Now you probably go, well, this is, you know, Wayne's ankle, Wayne and James's ankle, it probably doesn't need it. Well, you know what, it doesn't hurt. So I took the grinding stone, went through the center of there, made sure everything was very smooth, then again, beveled that edge and beveled that edge. You know, if you're gonna do it, you might as well do it well, right? Okay, get that out of the way. All right, so I used a silicone wire. You can see several hanging here. I've already braided my wires, so I have my 24 volts positive and my 24 volts negative with the Anderson connector, which will basically go in one of these brackets. Again, here's another one. Now, important thing to realize with this, and the reason that this one only has 1 screw through it right now. There is a second screw, if you may have noticed when I flipped it over, and you can see in the bottom. Foot shell is steel. Anderson power poles are plastic, and they have little plastic edges. And unfortunately, what happened is I was preparing this together, it bumped into the steel foot shell, bumped into the edge, and cracked. Black on this one, and my orange on this one. Now, is that a showstopper? No. A little super glue, put it back in place. It's literally just a support, and it matches back up with this side they made up just perfectly, you know, no issues at all. Slides right on, okay? I just more wanted to have it so it had the overall structure and shape to it. All right, so that being said, the next big step that we're gonna do is, well, actually back up, get this out of the way. All right, so I used silicone wire for going through, and it's just a standard silicone wire. This was a 10 gauge, 600 volt black 10 foot. I got this from DigiKey. I had 2 packages of black, 2 packages of red, and I actually have orange, so that's okay. Silicone wire works fantastically. It's super flexible and bends really easily. I then ran it through my firewire sheath. It's got to have a little orange in there, and so this makes it very easy to stand out. And then a little electrical tape to kind of keep this stuff compressed. That way it doesn't expand out on me. I then used some stainless steel braid. All right, so I have that on there, and again, probably over-engineering this and overthinking it, but that's just my way of doing things. I always worry about these friction points. So you have an ankle here, and it's going to shift back and forth. While that's not a lot of motion, it is some motion. It can provide wear and tear on the wires themselves. So I wanted to try to give them as much protection as possible without them coming up some sort of steel conduit or something like that, which is way ridiculous. This flex braided sheath should work just fine in protecting it, but I went overkill. So this sheathing went inside of this stainless steel sheathing. Now that braiding is not going to get cut, torn, or otherwise. It took a pair of tin snips to actually work my way through the braid just to make the cuts. So this is good stuff. So that starts here. So it comes out of the Anderson power pole block that I have, and then it feeds up down into here, some heavy duty shrink tubing, and then it goes down inside, makes the U-turn, comes back up, comes out this braiding. Now that comes higher than the ankle because, well, here's our pivot point for the ankle. So we already know we're inside the ankle at this point. So that's all nice and protected. If you didn't notice, I also did the same thing to the Q85 wire. It's in the fire braid as well as inside the stainless steel protected sheath connector on the end. So that, right now I just have it kind of tucked out of the way because it is easier to keep that pin head, those pins, from getting jacked up while you're trying to put the foot shell in and wire everything through. It's just easier to get this on top of this, everything in place, lined up, get your screws in place. This wire set is already running through your main channel hole, and then you can go ahead and feed up that other one. Now, if you've noticed, I have another wire that's here. It's a white wire, and it is, what gauge is it? I think it's an 18 gauge that I used. Anyway, it's showing me temperatures, but I don't remember what gauge it was. All right, so I ran it in a black electromagnetic shielding wire sheath that I have, and it's small, and it's literally designed just large enough for a single wire to go through. You could run servo wires through it. It's wide enough to do that. Now, why did I do that? I have a positive and negative electrical current. Currents form a magnetic field as they move, so as there's electricity going through there, there's potentially a electromagnetic magnetic field that's going to be trying to influence this wire. This wire is my safety control kill wire. So basically, one kill switch on the droid goes down, comes down through this, goes through into the battery box, and impacts the series of 2 relays that are in there that basically turns off the 24-volt power supply coming out. So it turns off this orange. There's no longer any power. You still have ground. You can do everything like that. So you don't have to worry about it going off. It's dead. No more power. There's also a cell logger in there that basically does the same thing, trips one of the other relays that's in there, and then basically turns it off so that you don't overdraw the batteries. So both of those kind of a redundant focus. What else? What else? What else? Yep, so the extra holes. So remember we had to do 2 extra screw holes for the foot channel and the foot. That meant our standard 4 that we had, 2 on each foot, wasn't going to be enough, so had to do some new paint on some new screws. So I got a total of 8 screws ready to go. Let's see, what else? What else? What else? Oh, we ended up taking off these little hose clamps. Challenge ran into, initially they went on great when we first had R2 all together. However, over some time have realized that they don't hold their form very well. So actually just talking with Todd and Mike and George and Matt down in Portland, or in the Vancouver area this last weekend. Real simple idea, just wrap this end in electrical tape. Got it so it basically is a nice tight pressure fitting into the foot shell through the nose hose fittings, the knurled hose fittings. And if I've completely butchered it, these things, the knurled hose fittings. So I can just screw that on, and now I can push these hoses through. There's a plastic hose inside the aged weathered braiding, and it just goes right inside. No big deal. Alright, so with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start pulling some of this assembly together. Stick around. Alright, so what I'm doing, I don't know if you just noticed, I pulled 2 of the screws back out, so I've got 2 of the 4 in, and there's ever so slight binding as it goes in. So all I'm doing is I was taking the tap that I had used for putting this in, creating these for these holes. I'll tell you the size here in a second. It is a 1/4 by 20. Just making sure there's not some sort of foreign debris or piece of paint or metal shard or something like that stuck in there that's giving me heartache, because they just didn't want to go in. They were binding up just a little bit. So I've learned enough at this point that it's better to spend the 30 seconds to go ahead and get that cleaned up rather than having it bind up. So, alright, what we're doing now is, as you can see, we have the foot shell upside down. So I now have, hold still. I have my, bring it up. Alright, so I have my Anderson power poles. They fit right in there, so you still have to do it to this one. You take away the edges on these as well as on the back side, so it kind of not rounds them, just flattens them so that it's more of a pentagon shape, and that allows it to get past the edge here, and then also on the side channel on this, so as it pivots, it's not having any issues. It's now all lined up. The wires are a little bit in the way, but they won't be a problem when we go through and push the bolt in. So now that it is in position, we have our long screws in there. Well, now that I haven't started, I'll show you. Try to get it lined up. Alright, so right there, you'll see one screw, and right there is the other screw. And those are the two that are holding that acrylic box, or acrylic rectangle on there. Pentagon, technically, I guess, now if you look at it. And so I'm literally just tightening that down. It will clear all the tolerances, and it will just be nice and snug in there. And the nice thing is that, you know, I can, for taking apart the foot shell, originally when I did these with the Q85s and James's getup, COM-8, everything went from the Vex plate down into here, and so you can see the shafts of the screws coming into the Vex plate. By the flip side now, the head is in the bottom and the shaft is going inside the foot channel. I had to come to grips with that, and it's not a bad thing. It actually makes it easier to get it apart, which means that when I have the leg disconnected, if I ever have to again, the only way that I'm going to be able to get the foot shell off is to be able to move these, loosen up one and remove the other one all the way out so that it can rotate freely, and that gets it past the side of the foot shell. Okay, and that is in there. That is not going anywhere. All right, some other things to point at while I've got this side flipped up. So let's see. Right down in here, so I can get it to where you can see. Got my fat arm in the way. Maybe try a little light. Okay, so you can see that metal bracket that's just grabbing onto the wires. It doesn't go all the way around. It's just literally grabbing on, keeping it secure so it's held up nice and tight. Very far away, the chance of any debris grabbing that or catching it is absolutely minimal. Oh, yes, almost forgot. I don't need trusty light anymore. Alright, so we also talked about the foot shell tolerances. So I told you how I took 5 millimeters off of the Vex foot shell, Vex plate. As you can see, it is literally, you know, just a little more than a screwdriver width from the bottom of the foot shell. Before it actually tried to ride up and was pushing against those, so that was where I ran into that problem. Alright, the other problem with having Kevin's foot plate with that long rod coming out, the ankle rod, like I said, as you saw, you know, you don't have wiggle room laterally anymore either, because it has that U-channel. Pardon me as I'm bending over doing all these things. So it has that U-channel, and as you push this up into place, your ability to, you know, what normally would have just finessed back and forth, you now have these two rods that are grabbing onto the center U-channel, and now it is making it literally impossible for you to have any wiggle room. So obviously you can see I'm running the four-wheel drive setup. I've got my belt here. I took away with a file, a 1-inch file, I took away a slot here. Get it up a little bit higher. Right here, I took away, and I took with a 1/2-inch file right there. And they only went half a file width, just enough so that the bolt is here and here could get past without having to wiggle and finagle and shake the crap out of this thing. So, so we got that, we got that, we got that. Oh, we got to run our motor wires in. Alright, so I don't know if you can see that. Here's our control wires, and then here is our Q85 control wires, and there's the pins that matches up. So now you're going, okay, well great, now what? So let's talk a little bit about why I'm doing it this way. So the Q85, before, that other screw that was holding the plate, not the foot shell, Kevin's plate, you saw there was the two screws, and one had, right here, sorry, I have the rebel bug biting my leg. So we had one of these cable connectors on there, right? So when I originally did this, I had two. I had one on each side, and one secured the Q85 all the way down inside there, the wiring for it, and then the Q85 cable went down inside, and the two matched up. As you can see, I'm not doing that anymore. Why? Well, this cable is not going to get any shorter for any reason. You shorten this, I'm buying a new Q85. Alright, so plain and simple with that. The other challenge is, so back up here in the shoulder hole, Kevin and I talked about this a bunch. I talked about, hey, why not just reaming out the center, a smidge larger, so that the Q85 cables, which have this nice Molex connector that Kevin's already provided for it, plus the power. So this has the Hall sensors, and then this has your three motor controllers. Okay. So I was convinced, hey, I just want to make that hole just a little bit wider. It just needs like a millimeter or two wider so it can go through. And that's when Kevin showed me some horror videos of his droid using slightly different thickness of aluminum pipe that he bored through to make the shoulders. And we decided that for best interest, you really only should have to do this once, maybe twice. There should be a better way to do this. So the way I'm doing it, as you can see, I've already snaked these down through. So I started from the inside of the droid and came out with this connector. And so this will run down the leg into the ankle, and I will feed that and connect it before I put the whole leg together. It might mean a little bit of acrobatics. It also means that while this wire is coming down, these wires are going up, and they will feed through this point. And obviously, no problem. They'll go straight through. So that's fine. So that's why we did it this way. Alright, so I'm going to get set up for the next phase, and stick around. We'll be back for some more. Hey, so I realized when I grabbed the ankle and was getting ready to put this on here that I did not show you how I enlarged it. So as you can see, there's my slot. Here is the original hole where the threaded steel rod went through for the COM-8 ankle lock system. I've patched it, as you can see. Did I do as good of a paint job on this? I would argue no, obviously, but it's the bottom side of an ankle. I don't know, the camera actually hides it pretty good. Let's see if I can get it. You can see how bad. There it is. You can see the nice lines. Yeah, and honestly, not worried about it. I masked it down, painted it real quick. It has the same steel in there. There's some aluminum plate on the inside to reinforce the JB weld. Not worried about it. It's facing down. The likelihood of someone seeing that part versus this large part is way less. This large part, yeah. So I even couldn't remember where I had it. I was more concerned about being that seen, especially since it will, as it pitches away, that will be more visible. So on each of your ankles, they are going to go different directions. So on the other ankle, it will go down this way, and this one goes this way. And this goes to 18 degrees, maybe 18.1, and like 0.3-ish. So I mean, it's very, very close to 0 and 18. You want to get it as close as you can, and I will tell you, take your time. You can literally be like, oh, I got this in 1 or 2 more times with the file, and it suddenly went a full ½ degree farther. So take your time. Here is also, so this hole, as you can see, I've enlarged these from the original. It went full sidewall to sidewall now, and this one is much, much larger. I can get my whole finger in there. This is the portion that will handle up to this head, which is way larger than anything else that we have. And then this side will receive the braided wire that I already have done. So I just felt I needed to share that. And it also, of note, this hole, the largest hole, it was designed so that it comes out on the same side as the VEX wire, or not the VEX, the Q85 control wire. And so this side is smaller, this side is larger, and it's intentionally on the same side as the Q85. So on the other foot shell, it comes out on the other side. All right, hope that helps. Okay, so see, we have the ankle on, and we have our wires run through, and the VEX, or the Q85 controller wire is right there, and it actually doesn't move at all, which is really nice. And we've already run our pin through the ankle, the foot shell, the foot bracket, and we put Kevin's cotter pin in there. Just a note on that, I really, really recommend these 1/4 inch Pittsburgh hex bolt extensions. It goes on a socket set. You don't need the socket, but just literally being able to reach that in there and get that pushed into place. You can use a mallet or whatever if you've got, like I've got, really good, nice fit. It's easy to turn and adjust. I was able to get my holes for the pin lined up. And I also went and picked up a nice set of long needle nose, and I was able to feed that right in there and push it in. No hassle. That's probably the first time I've said that in this project. Now, I will admit that the next big challenge will be getting this all the way onto that cable. That will be challenging. It will prove to be interesting. We'll make it work. It's all good. We only have to do this occasionally, so it's not like I plan on taking R2's legs apart all the time. One other thing we should show. That on there, and where did it go? There it is. So it's a little Johnson's level. Turn it on, and it is magnetic, which is nice. So you can see that at full vertical, once everything stops shaking, it is at 0.0. And it's about 20 degrees. That was where I took my eye off and went a hair farther than I wanted to go. So, some of this also, as it vibrates just a little bit, so it moves around. But the important thing is, hey, check your measurements. Check your measurements, check your measurements, check your measurements. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take the camera off, because this is going to be a small, tight space while I put the battery box back on, because it means I have to lay this all down on its side, and then I have to cram my hand inside the battery box shell on the shelf in order to get it to attach here. I'm fairly certain there will be expletives involved and disgruntled looks upon my face, so I'm just going to bypass that. We'll cut to an Imperial commercial. See you in a little bit. Alright, hey, welcome back. Alright, I will admit, that was way easier. So another advantage, always retap those, check them, blow some compressed air, canned air through it, just make sure it's all nice and clean. I had done that prior to ensure my battery boxes had clean tap holes onto the foot shells. And man, I almost finger tighted those on all the way, and then I used my my sawed-off Allen, because you know sometimes a regular size Allen just can't get in there. You can see the height difference between the two of them. Sometimes the regular one just can't get in there. Or if you got big paws like Kodiak does, those just don't fit in there well. And then you can see that we got our battery boxes on, all of our greeblies are there, the cover's back on. There's no batteries inside. And then we just did our hoses in place. And I will admit, I originally had the hoses at about 14 and a half, 15 inches of exposed tubing. And it just looked funky. Talked to some guys this weekend, came down, they all had about 14 inches exposed, 13 and a half exposed. So that's what I went with. I went with 13 and a half exposed. And man, that just looks more on par. You really wouldn't think half of an inch or an even full inch would make that big of a difference on a curve, you know, but suddenly it sticks it out, you know, a good distance bigger, and it just looked wonky. At least based on how this is looking at right now, I'm much happier with how it looks. It could be my mood.